I thought marriage meant safety, a forever home where love built walls stronger than bricks. But the night my mother-in-law texted me, we changed all the locks. Everything collapsed. I stood outside my own house with nothing but a suitcase, my husband's silence echoing louder than any scream. For months I disappeared, living in a cramped room, counting coins to eat, yet every insult, every betrayal carved fire into my bones. They believed they erased me, reduced me to nothing. What they didn't know was that they had just created the most dangerous version of me. When I first married Daniel, I believed I had stepped into a perfect picture frame. The house was spacious, filled with light and expensive furniture, and his family welcomed me with polite smiles that seemed warm enough to melt away my doubts. On the night before our wedding, his mother handed me a velvet box containing a necklace she called the family's heirloom. She pressed it into my hands with such ceremony that I almost cried, whispering how grateful I was to be accepted. In that moment, I convinced myself that every fairy tale might be real if you loved hard enough. The wedding itself was breathtaking, every detail curated to perfection. Guests gasped at the grand hall, the music swelled, and I looked at Daniel thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. Then, in the middle of the celebration, as the champagne glasses clinked, his mother leaned in so close I could smell her perfume. With a smile frozen on her lips, she whispered, "Don't ruin this family." Her words sliced through me like a hidden blade. I tried to laugh it off, pretending it was a nervous joke, but my chest tightened. I told myself she was anxious, protective. But the warning echoed long after the vows. The months that followed were a delicate balancing act. At dinners, she would compliment me in front of neighbors, only to criticize every choice I made once the door closed. "That dress makes you look ambitious," she would mutter, as if ambition were a disease. Daniel brushed it off, telling me she only wanted the best for us. I wanted to believe him. So I swallowed my pride and worked harder, cooking elaborate meals, rearranging the house, laughing at jokes I didn't find funny. If love meant sacrifice, I thought, then surely I could carry this weight. But the cracks kept spreading. One evening, when I came home late from a freelance project, the living room was quiet. On the table sat the heirloom necklace, not in its box, but lying exposed, its chain twisted. I reached for it, but Daniel's sister appeared in the doorway. "You should take better care of what isn't really yours," she said flatly. Shame flushed through me. Later I asked Daniel about it, but he avoided my eyes, muttering, "Don't start another fight." I realized then that my husband's silence was not neutrality. It was allegiance. Still, I tried. For our first wedding anniversary, I prepared a dinner reservation at his favorite restaurant, hoping to rekindle whatever flame had dulled. I wore the necklace, determined to show them I belonged. I left flowers on the table and texted Daniel, "I'm waiting." Minutes passed, then an hour. The waiter cleared the table with pity in his eyes. My phone buzzed. I smiled, thinking he was apologizing. Instead, I saw the message. "We changed all the locks." I read it again, the words rearranging themselves in my mind, trying to find another meaning. But there was none. My hands shook as I called him, only to hear his voicemail. I rushed home, breathless, heart pounding. But when I reached the door, the key wouldn't turn. The lock had been replaced. The windows were dark. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining for any sign of life inside. But the house that had once been my sanctuary had rejected me. I slept in my car that night, clutching my suitcase, too stunned to cry. At dawn, I returned, hoping it had been a mistake. Instead, a note was taped to the door. "It's for the best, move on." No signature, no apology, just dismissal, as though I were an unwelcome tenant rather than a wife. Days blurred into weeks. I rented a tiny room downtown, its walls thin enough to hear the arguments of strangers. I told myself Daniel would call, that this was temporary, but silence became the loudest answer. Through mutual acquaintances, I discovered the truth. His mother had been planning my exit for months, instructing Daniel to wait until after the first year, when appearances would no longer matter. The necklace had not been a gift of acceptance. It was a leash, a performance. I replayed every conversation, every moment I thought was love, realizing I had been performing in a play I never auditioned for. Daniel wasn't my partner. He was his mother's obedient son, her pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. One night, staring at the cracked ceiling of my rented room, I let the truth sink in. I had lost my husband, my home, and my dignity in one stroke. The illusion was gone. All that remained was a woman stripped bare, standing on the ruins of trust. But deep beneath the rubble, something stirred. Not anger, not grief, something sharper, a voice that whispered, "They believe they erased you. Prove them wrong." The room I rented was barely larger than a closet. The wallpaper peeled in strips, and the ceiling leaked when it rained, dripping onto the thin mattress that sagged under my weight. At night, I listened to footsteps echoing in the hallway, to strangers shouting, to silence settling like dust. I survived on instant noodles and day-old bread, every bite tasting of humiliation. I had fallen so far, so quickly, that I wondered if there was any point in getting up again. For weeks, I lived in that haze of defeat. My reflection in the cracked mirror looked like a stranger, hair unkempt, eyes hollow, a necklace gathering dust in a drawer. Sometimes I held it, the so-called heirloom, wondering if I should pawn it for food, but each time I closed the drawer instead. Selling it felt like surrender, and surrender was the only thing I could not bear. One night, I opened a blank notebook and began to write. At first, it was just anger, pages of fury, every insult replayed, every betrayal recorded. But gradually the words shifted. I wrote down numbers, budgets, wild ideas for businesses I had once dismissed as childish dreams. I mapped out what I would do if I ever had the chance. By candlelight, I turned pain into ink, and ink into plans. I started taking online courses, hiding my exhaustion behind determination. Finance, digital marketing, e-commerce, subjects I had never cared for before became lifelines. I devoured lectures until dawn, my laptop balanced on my knees, the room glowing with the faint light of ambition. For the first time since that text message, I felt a spark that warmed me more than any blanket. Then I found it. While going through a box of forgotten papers Daniel had left in storage, documents I had taken when I was forced out, I stumbled upon an old contract. It was nothing remarkable at first glance, a small distribution deal he had abandoned because he wasn't interested in small margins. But to me, it was an invitation. The contacts were still valid, the supplier still active. Where he had seen inconvenience, I saw possibility. I spent days poring over the details, running numbers, imagining how I could twist that scrap of paper into something alive. It became my hidden weapon, a seed no one else valued but me. I didn't tell anyone. I carried it like a secret flame, knowing it could burn me or light my path. With trembling hands, I reached out to the supplier listed on the contract. To my surprise, they remembered Daniel's arrogance, his dismissal. But when I spoke, I wasn't Daniel. I was hungry, determined. I pitched my vision, a boutique e-commerce shop selling curated lifestyle goods. They hesitated, then agreed to a trial run. My heart raced. I had no team, no money, no office, just a laptop and the will to try. At first, the store was laughably small, a website cobbled together from free templates, product photos I shot on my phone, orders trickling in one by one. I packed items on my mattress, labeled boxes on the floor, and carried them down 3 flights of stairs to the post office. Each sale felt like a victory, proof that I was not finished. It was then I reconnected with Maya, a college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She was now a financial analyst at a venture firm, sharp and confident in ways I envied. When she heard my story, she didn't pity me. Instead, she leaned across the cafe table and said, "You're already doing the hardest part. You started." Maya became my unexpected mentor. She taught me how to read balance sheets, how to pitch, how to recognize when risk was worth taking. With her guidance, my little shop grew legs. We spoke late into the night, planning strategies, and she reminded me of who I had once been before marriage had turned me into someone else's shadow. Still, a question haunted me. As orders grew, as my savings slowly returned, I wondered, was I building this to prove them wrong, or was I building it to prove myself right? Revenge was sweet in fantasy, but fragile in reality. Would success mean anything if it was only a weapon against the past? I stared at my reflection, this time in the clean glass of a cafe window, laptop open, plans scattered around me. For the first time, I didn't see the woman who had been locked out. I saw someone with the keys to her own future. The heirloom necklace no longer mattered. The locks no longer mattered. What mattered was the fire they had sparked inside me. The crossroads stretched before me, to create a business as a blade aimed at my in-laws' throats, or to create it as a foundation for my rebirth. For the first time in months, I felt something powerful. Not rage, not grief, but choice. And choice, I realized, was the greatest weapon of all. The first real contract felt like oxygen after months of drowning. A mid-sized retailer agreed to stock my products for a trial run. And when the signature came through, I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My little bedroom business was suddenly real, acknowledged by someone outside of myself. I packaged the first shipment with hands that trembled, not from fear this time, but from hope. Sales grew steadily, quietly. Then something unexpected happened. A TikTok user, some college girl I had never met, posted a short video about my products, calling them the only thing that makes my tiny apartment feel like home. She had maybe 20,000 followers, but the clip went viral overnight. Within days, orders exploded. I woke up to hundreds of notifications, my inbox flooding with inquiries. Strangers tagged my brand, praising it, demanding restocks. I barely slept. Fueled by adrenaline and coffee, my cramped apartment transformed into a warehouse of ambition. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. But joy carries shadows. With every new order, every mention, I felt a chill in the back of my mind. Because if strangers had discovered me, then so could the people I had worked hardest to disappear from. And they did. The first sign came in the form of a phone call from an unknown number. I let it ring, but the voicemail chilled me. My mother-in-law's voice, smooth and sharp. "Congratulations, you've been busy." No anger, no warmth, just acknowledgement, like a predator noting the sound of its prey. Soon after, whispers began to appear online. Anonymous accounts claimed my products were cheap imports, repackaged at inflated prices. One claimed I had stolen the business idea from my ex-husband. Hashtags bloomed like weeds. Negative reviews flooded in, written by people who had never purchased a thing. I knew exactly who was behind it. The same family who had locked me out was now trying to lock me down again, only this time through the court of public opinion. I tried to fight back with proof, receipts, invoices, testimonies from real customers, but lies travel faster than truth. Sales slowed, investors hesitated, and for the first time I felt the ground beneath my feet tilt. That was when Daniel appeared. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, standing in the dim hallway like a ghost of another life. His suit was pressed, his smile rehearsed, his eyes damp with a sadness I no longer trusted. "I made a mistake," he said softly. "I should have defended you. Mom went too far. Let me make it right." For a moment, my heart wavered. I remembered nights when he had held me, when I had believed he was my partner. But then I looked closer. His gaze flicked to the boxes stacked behind me, to the papers on my desk, to the success he had not expected. He wasn't here for me. He was here for access. Still, I let him speak. He offered apologies wrapped in half-truths, promises that if we reconciled, the family would stop. He called me my wife again, as though the word could erase the note they had taped to the door. I didn't agree. but I didn't refuse. I watched him closely, and it didn't take long for my suspicions to prove true. Days later, confidential information I had only shared with him leaked online. Competitors began undercutting my prices. Investors backed away again, murmuring about instability. He had come back not as a husband, but as a spy. The scandal deepened. A blogger published an expose accusing me of fraud, citing insider sources. Photographs appeared of me in unflattering angles, paired with captions that painted me as ruthless, greedy, untrustworthy. Orders plummeted. I spent nights staring at my bank account, watching numbers drain like blood from a wound. At one point, I nearly lost everything. A shipment went unfulfilled because I couldn't cover the cost. Customers demanded refunds I couldn't afford. The very brand that had once made me feel reborn now threatened to bury me under its weight. I sat in the dark one night, my laptop closed, silence pressing in from all sides. It felt like chapter 1 all over again. Abandoned, humiliated, trapped. Except this time, the world was watching. But even as I teetered on the edge of collapse, something inside me whispered the same words it had months ago. They believe they can erase you, prove them wrong. The long game was far from over. The night I almost gave up, I realized silence was no longer protection. It was permission. As long as I let my story be twisted by others, I would remain trapped inside their narrative. So I opened my laptop, logged onto every platform I had, and pressed Go Live. At first, only a handful of viewers tuned in. My voice trembled as I began, recounting everything. The wedding that had been a performance, the whispered threats, the night I was locked out, the false rumors. Then I held up the note they had taped to my door. It's for the best. Move on. My hands shook, but my voice grew stronger. I showed proof of the leaked contracts, the false reviews, the financial sabotage. I named names. I refused to hide. Within minutes, comments flooded in. Strangers who had bought from me vouched for the quality of my products. Viewers shared the stream, tagging influencers and journalists. The numbers climbed. Hundreds, then thousands, then hundreds of thousands. By morning, clips of my testimony were everywhere. Headlines called it the lockout story, and hashtags painted me not as a villain, but as a survivor. The shift was immediate. Where investors had once pulled away, they now called back, their voices eager. "We believe in your resilience," one wrote. Another said, "You've proven not only your business, but your character." My inbox filled with offers I had once dreamed of, but never dared to expect. Maya, my mentor, grinned across the table as we read them together. "You didn't just survive," she said. "You turned the fire back on them." Soon, major outlets covered my story. Forbes featured my startup as a case study in perseverance, branding me the woman who rewrote betrayal. The valuation of my company skyrocketed into the millions. I signed new contracts, expanded operations, hired a small team. My cramped apartment became a buzzing office filled with light and laughter. For the first time in a year, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. But success comes with aftershocks. As my star rose, the dominoes began to fall on the other side. My mother-in-law's reputation, once untouchable in her social circles, crumbled. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends she had cultivated for decades cut her off, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The family name, once whispered with respect, became synonymous with cruelty and manipulation. Daniel withdrew from the spotlight, his career quietly dissolving under the cloud of exposure. His silence was no longer a weapon, it was an admission. The cruelest irony arrived months later when my sister-in-law, who had once mocked me for daring to dream, walked into my company's lobby with a resume in hand. I wasn't there, but my assistant told me the look on her face when she realized where she was applying. Devastation. The job market had been unkind, and desperation had driven her straight into the empire she once laughed at. I never called her back. Some lessons are meant to sting. I should have felt triumphant. I should have celebrated. I had climbed out of the ashes, turned betrayal into currency, and proven every one of them wrong. And yet, on quiet nights when the noise of success faded, I felt an ache that victory couldn't soothe. Because the truth was simple. I had won, but the prize was hollow. The family I once dreamed of building had been replaced with a fortress of achievements. The necklace still sat in my drawer untouched, its chain a reminder that acceptance had been an illusion. Every headline, every accolade was fuel, but it could not warm the emptiness inside. One evening, I sat in my new office as the city lights flickered below. The team had gone home, the building was quiet, and I stared out the window at the skyline. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who believed a wedding was a promise, that love was stronger than manipulation. She was gone. In her place was someone fiercer, sharper, successful, but also lonelier. I told myself this was the price of survival, that maybe the point of fire wasn't to keep you warm, but to burn away everything that tried to contain you. The world now called me a phoenix. They weren't wrong. I had risen from the ashes, but what they didn't see was the hollow chest, the ache of what had been lost. And maybe that was the truest lesson, that even when you win, the fire leaves scars. At first, success felt intoxicating. My company's valuation climbed higher each quarter. Investors praised me as a visionary, and my face appeared on magazine covers. Journalists called me the Phoenix Entrepreneur, a woman who had transformed humiliation into triumph. But soon, another label stuck harder, the Ice Queen. They wrote about my coldness, my refusal to reconcile with family, the way I dodged questions about love or forgiveness. My silence, once my shield, now made me a villain in the eyes of the public. I walked through boardrooms where executives applauded me, then turned on the television at night to see commentators dissecting my supposed cruelty. They said I was heartless, a woman who had abandoned her husband and destroyed her in-laws for revenge. None of them had slept in a car with a suitcase, or eaten instant noodles by candlelight, or watched their dreams dismantled by people they loved. They only saw the armor I had built to survive and mistook it for my skin. The more successful I became, the lonelier I felt. Friends drifted away, unsure how to approach the woman whose life now belonged to headlines. Dates ended before they began, intimidated by the weight of my story. Even Maya, my closest ally, seemed distant at times, swallowed by her own world. Victory tasted sweet, but it was laced with poison. The worst wound of all was one I had buried deep, a truth I had never shared publicly. In the early days of my marriage, before the locks changed, I had been pregnant. I carried that fragile hope in silence, planning names in my journal, dreaming of the child that would make the family complete. Then the night I was locked out, the shock shattered more than my heart. The pregnancy ended in a blur of hospital lights and tears. I never told Daniel. I never told anyone. That loss became the silent ghost haunting every boardroom, every award ceremony, every photograph. Behind the woman Forbes celebrated was a mother who never got to be. And just when I thought I had mastered my scars, the past found new ways to invade. It began with whispers in the philanthropic circles I had recently entered. I had launched a foundation to support women abandoned or mistreated by their families, a way to turn my pain into purpose. At first, donations flowed, and the mission thrived. But then I heard rumors that someone close to me was attempting to redirect the funds, to siphon influence. The name behind it was one I knew too well, my mother-in-law. She had found a new battlefield. Where she once controlled a household, she now sought to manipulate a foundation meant for healing. And as always, Daniel was by her side, not as a partner, but as her obedient shadow. Reports reached me that he attended meetings, speaking as though he still had a claim to me, to my name, to my work. The man who once shut the door on me now tried to walk through the one I had built from ashes. But the sharpest betrayal came from where I least expected it. One of my allies, a colleague who had supported my brand from the early days, began aligning with them. He promised me loyalty, but behind closed doors, he negotiated deals with my enemies, trading access to my network for personal gain. I discovered emails, contracts, undeniable proof. My stomach sank as I read them, realizing that betrayal was not just a wound of the past. It was a recurring cycle, repeating in new forms, demanding new defenses. I felt the weight of everything pressing down. I had built an empire, but it was one surrounded by vultures. I had money, influence, power, but I was still the girl standing outside a locked door, wondering if she would ever belong. The enemies had multiplied, not only family, but colleagues, strangers, opportunists, and the walls I had built to protect myself now threatened to become a prison. The world called me powerful, but at night I lay awake with the same question burning in my chest. Was this the price of victory? That to rise meant to stand alone, to lose trust, to bleed quietly so no one could smell weakness? I didn't know the answer. I only knew that the higher I climbed, the more fragile the air became, and that even in triumph, betrayal had a way of finding me. For so long, revenge had been the current carrying me forward. Every late night, every strategy, every triumph had been sharpened by the thought of proving them wrong. But as I sat in my penthouse office one quiet evening, city lights shimmering against the glass, I felt the truth settle like a heavy blanket. Revenge was no longer enough. It had gotten me here, yes, but it couldn't take me further. What I craved now wasn't their downfall. It was my freedom. The realization unsettled me. I had built my empire on anger, on defiance, on the determination to never again be powerless. Letting go of that fuel felt like stepping off a cliff, yet holding onto it meant chaining myself forever to their memory. I understood then that the real victory was not in destroying them, but in releasing myself. So I began the hardest work of all, learning to forgive. Not them. They didn't deserve it. But myself. I forgave the girl who had believed lies, who had stood at the door with useless keys, who had lost a child in silence. I forgave her for being vulnerable, for being hopeful, for being human. Because she was not weak. She was the foundation of everything I had become. And with that forgiveness came a choice. I could continue replaying the past, or I could write something new. I chose the latter. I dissolved the last of my private grudges, not by erasing them, but by transforming them. Every scar became a lesson, every betrayal became a chapter, and I made a sacrifice, the decision to put down the sword of vengeance. It had served its purpose. Now it was time to build, not burn. From that decision, a new vision was born. I expanded my foundation into a full-scale organization dedicated to women abandoned or betrayed by their families. We offered legal aid, housing assistance, and business training. I wanted every woman who had ever felt powerless to know she had a way forward. The work gave me purpose deeper than profit ever had. I spoke at universities, on talk shows, at global conferences. My story, once a wound, became a beacon. I wrote a book not about revenge, but about resilience, about the power of rewriting your narrative. Letters poured in from women across the world who saw themselves in my journey. You gave me courage to leave. You reminded me I am not alone. Those words meant more than any headline. As the foundation grew, so did I. I was no longer the woman defined by betrayal. I was the woman who transformed it, the one who had taken a locked door and built a new house entirely. Slowly, I became less a businesswoman and more a symbol, though I never asked for it. The media now called me a national inspiration, an advocate, a force of change. And yet, through it all, I kept a ritual. Every morning before meetings, every night before sleep, I stood before a mirror. In the beginning, the reflection mocked me, a woman scarred, cold, hollow. But with time, the image changed. The woman staring back was steady, strong, not burdened by the past, but shaped by it. One evening, as the sun set, I caught my reflection and smiled. For the first time, I didn't see the victim who had been locked out, or the fighter, clawing her way back. I saw a woman who had created something lasting, something that would live beyond her. Legacy. That was the word. The locks that had once shut me out had become irrelevant. I no longer needed keys. I had built doors where none existed and held them open for others. And so, when people asked me how I endured betrayal, I no longer said, I survived. I said, I transcended. Because survival is about staying alive. Transcendence is about turning pain into power, and power into purpose. That was the story I carried forward. Not of a woman broken, but of a woman reborn, leaving behind not ashes, but light.